The lights in the Ed Sullivan Theater were blinding, as always. The studio audience was buzzing, unaware of how tense things were about to become. Stephen Colbert shuffled his cards at his desk, pretending to be relaxed. But he wasn't. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was tonight's guest, and no one was entirely sure how the interview would go. Behind the curtain, Kennedy adjusted his tie. He looked composed, but his mind was racing. This wasn't just another appearance. This was Stephen Colbert's stage. And Colbert was not known for pulling punches. The producer gave the signal. The curtain parted. "Ladies and gentlemen, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Colbert announced, his smile practiced, his tone light. Kennedy stepped out to a mixture of applause and curiosity. Some members of the audience clapped enthusiastically. Others hesitated. Everyone was watching closely. Colbert stood to greet him. They shook hands. Kennedy's grip was firm. Colbert's was colder than expected. "Robert, welcome," Colbert said, gesturing to the guest chair. "You've been in the news quite a bit lately." Kennedy sat down slowly. "That's what tends to happen when you speak your mind." Colbert chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Well," he said, "let's speak it then." The audience laughed lightly. Kennedy didn't. Colbert dove in immediately. "You've made a lot of controversial statements lately," Colbert said, crossing one leg over the other. "Especially about vaccines. Do you think your name shields you from accountability?" Kennedy didn't flinch. "My name doesn't protect me. It's a target. And I never asked to be shielded. I ask only for the chance to be heard fully, not selectively." Colbert leaned forward. "So you're saying you're misunderstood?" "I'm saying the truth doesn't fit neatly into sound bites. And people like you." Kennedy paused. "People with platforms don't always want the full truth." The audience shifted. This was not the tone they expected. Colbert nodded slowly. "Well then, let's get the full truth. You've said vaccines should be subject to more rigorous safety testing. But many interpret that as anti-science, anti-public health, dangerous rhetoric." Kennedy's jaw tightened. "I've never told people not to vaccinate. I've said they deserve transparency. That's not anti-science. That's accountability." Colbert interrupted. "You've compared vaccine mandates to authoritarianism. Don't you think that's reckless language?" "I think forced medical procedures without open debate is the reckless part," Kennedy answered. Colbert's smile vanished. "Robert, you're a Kennedy. That name used to stand for public service, for protecting the vulnerable. How do you reconcile that with promoting doubt during a pandemic?" Kennedy looked directly at him. "Do you believe service means silence? Do you believe integrity means repeating what's popular instead of what's right?" The audience was silent now. Colbert glanced at his notes, then tossed them aside. "Let's stop pretending this is a polite conversation," he said. "You came on this show knowing we don't agree. You knew what I was going to ask. So tell me, what is your goal?" Kennedy's voice lowered. "My goal is to make people ask questions again, to remind them that science is a process, not a decree, and that disagreement is not heresy." Colbert didn't respond. The silence stretched long. Then he turned to the audience. "Do we still have the freedom," he asked aloud, "to question everything without consequence?" He looked back at Kennedy. "Or do we only have the freedom to question what's convenient?" Kennedy didn't smile. He simply said, "Exactly." The studio lights felt hotter now. The air felt thinner. Colbert picked his note cards back up, more out of habit than need. "So what do you say to the people who lost loved ones to COVID? Who see your words as betrayal?" Kennedy sat straighter. "I say I grieve with them. And I say that protecting lives doesn't mean surrendering liberty. It means having hard conversations, even when they're messy, even when they make us uncomfortable." There was no applause, no laughter, just stillness. Colbert looked off stage, then back at Kennedy. "This isn't going the way I planned," he said quietly. Kennedy nodded. "It never does when people stop performing." The camera zoomed in on Colbert's face. His smile was gone. His control was slipping. The audience didn't know whether to clap or look away. And the interview wasn't even halfway done. The red light above the camera turned off as they cut to commercial, but the tension in the studio did not. Colbert leaned back in his chair and stared at Kennedy, as if trying to recalibrate. Kennedy adjusted the cuff of his shirt and said nothing. There was no small talk, no banter, just silence and heat. A production assistant approached the desk with a clipboard, whispering updates. Colbert waved her off. "We're going to finish this," he muttered. When the camera light blinked back on, Colbert forced a smile that barely touched his eyes. "Welcome back," he said to the camera. We're here with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., presidential candidate, author, activist, and, depending on who you ask, a truth teller or a dangerous conspiracy theorist. The audience let out a few nervous laughs. Kennedy did not react. Robert, Colbert continued, you've spent years criticizing institutions. Scientific, governmental, journalistic. Some say that makes you brave. Others say it makes you reckless. Why should anyone trust you over the CDC? Kennedy answered without blinking. Because trust is not something you inherit. It's something you earn. And when institutions fail to be transparent, when they change narratives without explanation, they forfeit the public's trust. I don't tell people what to believe. I tell them to ask why they were told to stop asking questions. Colbert interrupted again. But where is the line, Robert? There has to be a line. There's a point where doubt becomes destabilizing, where asking too many questions creates chaos. Kennedy looked him in the eye. Questioning power is only dangerous to those who abuse it. The crowd stirred. Someone clapped. A few others joined. Then it stopped as quickly as it started. Colbert's eyes narrowed. You're good at this, he said, turning every answer into a soundbite, framing yourself as the reasonable one while the rest of us are painted as blind followers. Kennedy didn't respond. So let's talk specifics, Colbert said, flipping through his notes again. You've called for a re-examination of vaccine safety protocols. You've questioned the pharmaceutical industry's influence over federal regulators. Fine. But where do you draw the line between healthy skepticism and fueling paranoia? I draw the line, Kennedy said, wherever facts end and fear begins. I don't traffic in fear. I expose conflicts of interest. And if that makes people uncomfortable, then maybe it's the discomfort that needs examining, not the conversation. Colbert leaned forward. Are you vaccinated? Kennedy paused. Why does that matter? Because you preach about choice and transparency. Let's have some. Kennedy's voice dropped, steady and calm. My personal health decisions are not the point of this conversation. My advocacy is about systemic integrity, not individual compliance. But transparency, Colbert started, does not mean surrendering privacy, Kennedy finished. Colbert's face flushed. The audience was silent again. Nobody knew who had the upper hand. The tension turned physical. Colbert drummed his fingers on the desk. Kennedy folded his hands in his lap. There was no pretense of friendliness anymore. Only calculation. You're running for president, Colbert said. And you're doing it as a Democrat, in the party of public health mandates and centralized science. Are you trying to split the vote? Are you trying to sabotage the election? Kennedy's response was sharp. I'm trying to revive the soul of a party that once stood for the people, not for corporate sponsorships. I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm refusing to pretend. Colbert looked toward the camera, then back to Kennedy. You know what the headlines will say tomorrow. Kennedy nodded. They'll say I caused a scene. They'll say I was reckless. And they'll say you were the brave host who tried to push back. But they won't say what was actually said. Because what I said wasn't scandalous. It was just inconvenient. Colbert's jaw tensed. You think you're the only one being silenced. I think you're afraid of the same thing I am, Kennedy said. The difference is, I say it out loud. That was the moment everything changed. Colbert stood up. Kennedy stood too. We're done here, Colbert said flatly, looking off stage. That's enough. You don't want the next question? Kennedy asked quietly. I don't want a lecture, Colbert snapped. The studio doors opened. Two members of the production staff approached, slowly, cautiously. One gestured toward the exit. Kennedy turned to the audience. This is what happens, he said, when you answer a question without playing the game. There were murmurs. More clapping this time. Uneven. Hesitant. But growing. Colbert's face was frozen. Kennedy gave one last glance at the host. You wanted a confrontation, he said. You just didn't expect to lose control of it. He walked off the stage. No music played. No applause sign flashed. And Stephen Colbert didn't say a word. The exit door swung shut behind Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but the sound echoed through the studio like a final word no one could take back. For a full 10 seconds, Colbert said nothing. He remained seated, one hand resting on his desk, the other curled into a loose fist. His usual composure, the blend of quick wit and casual authority, was gone. In its place sat a man who had just lost control of his own stage. The silence stretched. Then the camera feed cut to a wide shot. A studio assistant could be seen conferring with the director. The audience, unsure whether the show was still in progress, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few clapped weakly. Most did not. Eventually, Colbert leaned into the microphone and addressed the crowd. "Well," he said, with a half-smile that didn't quite hold. "That was unexpected." No one laughed. He cleared his throat. "We invite guests onto this show for a reason. To have conversations. To challenge ideas. But we also have boundaries, and when a conversation turns into a monologue, or a campaign speech, or something that can spread harm, we have to draw the line." But even as Colbert said the words, something in his voice betrayed doubt. He was trying to retake the narrative, to reaffirm control. Yet the studio's quiet tension remained. Because everyone had seen what happened. And everyone knew the truth was messier than Colbert was now pretending. Meanwhile, backstage, Kennedy stood in a narrow hallway with his campaign staff. One of his aides checked his phone. "It's already trending," he said. Kennedy didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. Instead, he said nothing, his face expressionless as he watched the numbers rise. The headlines would spin the story in a dozen directions by morning. Some would praise Kennedy for standing his ground. Others would condemn the show for giving him a platform. Still more would accuse Colbert of shutting down dissent, of silencing a guest when the conversation turned inconvenient. But none of those headlines could change what people had seen with their own eyes. Colbert had tried to push. Kennedy had pushed back harder. And when the moment came, the host hadn't had an answer. Only the authority to end it. What happened next would ripple beyond late-night television. Clips of the confrontation were already circulating. One video showed Kennedy asking about institutional trust. Another captured the moment he said, "You don't want the next question?" That clip went viral within the hour. Colbert's team released a brief statement later that night. It said the interview had strayed from its agreed format and claimed the decision to end it was based on editorial standards. But the wording felt clinical, calculated, like a lawyer had written it, and the audience noticed. Meanwhile, Kennedy's team posted nothing. No statement, no video, no caption, only a single photo. It showed Kennedy walking off stage, the red exit sign glowing above him. No words, just the image. It said everything. By the following morning, media outlets had split along predictable lines. Some called the moment a dangerous signal that misinformation had become entertainment. Others called it evidence of media gatekeeping, proof that powerful voices were unwilling to be challenged. But one thing was universally agreed upon. It was no longer just an interview. It was a cultural moment, a test of who gets to ask the questions, and who decides when the answers go too far. And for the millions who watched it unfold, one thought lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. If truth is only welcome when it's comfortable, then maybe it was never truth to begin with.